Today, has Rishi Sunak got Brexit done? Was the King right to meet the EU Commission President? And just what is causing Britain's salad shortage? With me today on Politics Live, Conservative MP and former Minister Kit Malthouse, Shadow Environment Secretary Jim McMahon, former Labour Home Secretary Jackie Smith and the political journalist and commentator Isabel Oakeshott. Today, the Prime Minister heads to Northern Ireland to sell his new Brexit deal.
We need a functioning government here, and that's what you need, that's what you deserve, and that's what I believe we've created the conditions to now make possible.
The deal's been widely welcomed, but not everyone is yet convinced.
My gut instinct is it doesn't cut the mustard. We're not there. The government needs to keep pressing and showing that if you push Europe, you will get changes.
Was the King right to meet the EU Commission President? Also today, what more can be done to prevent people crossing the Channel in small boats? This former Home Office Minister has come up with his own solution. And what's causing the shortage of salad in our supermarkets? Let's start with one of those stories in the headlines. Here is the Daily Mail. There's King Charles meeting Ursula von der Leyen yesterday after the press conference where she and the Prime Minister announced the Windsor Framework. With the question, could this meeting be a moment the King comes to regret? There was some consternation at perhaps the monarchy being involved to some extent with politics, although, of course, the talks were completely separate. Should it have happened, Kit?
Of course it should. I mean, I find the whole thing a bit odd. I mean, if the President of the European Union, which is over 500 million people, happens to be in town, and the same town in which you live, why wouldn't you drop in? And if you think about it, if the roles had been reversed, if the King had gone to Brussels, it would have been a bit odd if he hadn't dropped in on the President of the EU. So it seems perfectly reasonable, particularly given that he's newly enthroned, and therefore it seemed only polite to me for her to drop in and say hello.
Was it too close for comfort for you, Jim McMahon?
Well, I think we all recognise the soft power of the monarchy and the King, and that's important, and we deploy that for our diplomatic ends on a regular basis. We need to make sure, though, that the government don't overstep that, and I think providing that the lines of separation are in place, then the King, the monarchy has a role to play, but the government need to be very careful they don't misstep on it.
Kit Malthouse, you're looking very sceptical.
Yeah, it just seemed like a perfectly normal thing for the monarch to do. I don't know why there's a sudden massive constitutional implications that he might meet the President of the European Union.
It's not a perfectly normal day, though, Kit, is it? It's the culmination of an extremely controversial set of negotiations with a lot of politics to be played out, and I don't think the King was well advised to meet or to look at the very least as if he might be engaging in that political debate.
I think the difficulty here is that for Brexiteers, Ursula von der Leyen is a bit of a toxic figure, so that's why it's controversial. I have to say, as a Brexiteer, I can't find myself getting terribly worked up about it. The crucial thing is that neither Ursula von der Leyen nor any of her lackeys reveal any details of any conversation that happened. I would be a bit nervous about that coming out if I'd been in charge of that decision.
All right, well, let's keep with the subject of the Windsor Framework. It's been, it's landed rather well in the press. I should think Rishi Sunak is basking in the sort of warm glow of newspaper headlines. Of course, it hasn't been welcomed by the Democratic Unionist Party yet, hasn't been rejected either. But let's just take a couple of the headlines there. The Daily Telegraph, Sunak, my deal is a new way forward. And if we have a look at one of the other headlines in the papers, The Guardian, the Prime Minister hails new chapter in relations with EU after Northern Ireland deal. Of course, after meeting and announcing the framework with Ursula von der Leyen yesterday and then also in the Commons, the Prime Minister has travelled to Northern Ireland to try and sell the deal there, particularly to the Democratic Unionist Party, who are key in terms of their support for this new arrangement with the EU. Let's listen to the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, Jeffrey Donaldson.
Progress has been made. we continue to have some concerns. We will examine the legal text. We'll look at all of this in the round and come to a decision. We're reasonable people, but we want to ensure that what the Prime Minister has said is matched by what is actually in the agreement itself. Can it deliver on the areas of concern that we set out?
Will it, do you think, Kit Morthouse?
Well, I hope so. I mean, look, there's 100 pages to plough through. I have to confess to you, Joe, not yet ploughed through all of it myself, but it looks to me like a huge advance on where we were. And as I say, it's going to be interesting over the next few days to see. I mean, these things often have a huge reaction at the start, and then over the next 3 or 4 days, you know, they kind of picked apart and the little bits of grit in the oyster.
But do you think you should have gone for a vote sooner rather than later?
No, I think it's quite right to give it a bit of time so that people can digest it and see. The idea of bouncing anybody at this sensitive moment would have been a bit nuts. So, I mean, from my point of view, you know, you might remember, Joe, many years ago, I worked on a thing called the Malthouse Compromise. There are threads of the compromise in there.
Well,
this idea of
I was struggling to remember the Malthouse Compromise myself at the time, but yes, you did tweet. I can see the DNA of the compromise.
It did run the risk of just being an obscure GCSE politics question, but actually some of the stuff that we worked on, me, Steve Baker, Robert Buckland, Nicky Morgan, Damien Green, Stephen Hammond, is kind of in there, and you can see the DNA of it within. So I'm hopeful that we'll get there. I mean, look, I think it's a deal that we should take. Let's take it, make it work, and then see where we go from there.
Right. That's a critical thing, isn't it? And I'm really glad you didn't use the phrase, you know, getting Brexit done, because what this is actually a starting point. It's not an end point. It gives the ability to actually make something of the Brexit opportunity.
Because it hasn't done so far.
Well, it hasn't. I mean, why would I sit here and pretend that the Brexit opportunity has been maximised? Now, my suspicion is that the reason that the EU has agreed to this framework is because they don't have any real concern that this government, or indeed the likely Labour government that follows it, is actually going to make the most of the Brexit opportunity. We're not going to deregulate. We're not going to lower taxes to make Britain more competitive now we're out of the EU. Therefore, the EU has nothing to worry about. So it's up to you guys now. You've pulled this off. Now make the most of it.
Jim, is that right? Future Labour government wouldn't make the most of it?
Well, I mean, the starting point is that this is progress, and we should welcome that progress has been made. Labour has been very clear that there are elements of this that were on the table for some time, and actually we could have got here sooner. Labour's committed to supporting it as it passes through the House, but we all know that simply winning a vote in Parliament, it really is never the test in Northern Ireland. It's whether you can win trust and confidence of all communities in Northern Ireland to make this work in practice, because for the people of Northern Ireland, of course, they want this agreement in place, but the Assembly, the Executive needs to be in place to make sure that decent public services on a day-to-day basis can be provided.
I have to say, it sticks in the throat to hear you complaining about things should have been done sooner. It is your party, along with others, that have systematically attempted to block Brexit ever happening, as a result of which it's taken a lot longer than it would have done if they'd been allowed to get on with the job.
I'm sorry, we, you know, as somebody who wishes we had never left the EU, I accept that we have, but we were told by you and others campaigning for Brexit that this was all sorted, that we would be able to see the benefits. You've conceded we haven't seen the benefits so far, and that actually, you know, we'd got an oven-ready deal. Well, conclusive proof that we never did have.
You spent years preventing work on it by making everyone go through a series of
nonsense. I'm sorry.
Hang on. Let's check it out. I'll come to you. I'll come to you.
We voted for Theresa May's deal. We wouldn't be where we are.
Well, quite. We were told that
hang on. Let Jackie, because people can't hear if you talk over each other.
We were told that this was all sorted, that we were now in the sort of open waters of Brexit. That clearly wasn't the case.
You'd make it more difficult.
Isabel, shut up.
Excuse me.
Hang on. Let's not descend. Let's not descend into it. Hang on.
Civility in politics.
Yeah.
Is that
we'll come on to that.
I mean, is that your example of politeness in politics?
And I'm in
because it's low and poor.
And oh, come on, Isabel.
All right, let's return to the substance on this issue of who stalled what at the time. I mean, I think it was both sides, wasn't it? There were Conservative MPs who also brought...
But I think the use of language here is really important. The use of a phrase like stall completely misrepresents what was taking place at the time, which is that all of us were trying to reconcile completely new territory and trying to find a solution that reconciled, leaving an institution that we've been part of for decades in a completely unknown territory when it came to our borders, how we treat the movement of food, labour supplies and all the other issues that are now coming to pass. The concerns that were raised then about the deal not being robust are proving to be the case. We've literally got food rotting in the fields and supermarket shelves empty on the other side. Why? Because it's not been made to work.
Well,
I was trying
yes,
to
let me,
make
all right. Hang on. I'm going to let Jackie finish her point, and then we're going to just move on a little bit.
The
Go on.
point I was trying to make,
Hang on, Isabel. Go on.
without interruption, was I think, as Jim says, a real test of this will be whether or not we can now get back to a situation where the institutions, the devolved institutions in Northern Ireland, are able to get back and operate again. And that's why I do think this is a step forward. I do think, as Kit says, it's right that there should be time for the DUP and others to look at this in detail. But we've got to get back to a position where the people of Northern Ireland have got the government necessary to help them to solve all of the problems that they're not able to do at the moment.
Well, Rishi Sunak has one idea. He was extolling the dual market access that Northern Ireland is now in a position, in his words, to capitalise on. Let's have a listen.
That is the prize that is on offer. Because if we get this right, if we get this framework implemented, if we get the executive back up and running here, Northern Ireland is in the unbelievably special position, unique position in the entire world, European continent, in having privileged access, not just to the UK home market, which is enormous, 5th biggest in the world, but also the European Union single market. Nobody else has that. No one. Only you guys, only here.
Right. Well, if that's such a unique...
Of course.
Well, exactly. That is the position, of course, that the UK had.
Yeah, well, that's a reflection of the kind of unique geographical and cultural nature of Northern Ireland. But for me, I mean, one of the reasons that hold on a minute, one of the reasons that I voted to leave the European Union was because I thought there was a much bigger, wider world out there that we needed to address, and that, in fact, the economic poles of the earth are tilting to the east, and we needed to change our trading patterns to deal with that.
But now, is there something ironic listening... Hang on, I'm going to put... Is there something ironic listening to a Prime Minister who voted in favour of the UK leaving the EU, the single market for goods, extolling the virtues of that very unique position that Northern Ireland now finds itself in?
No, I don't think so. He's trying to sell a deal in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has, as I say, a particular geography and a particular sensitivity that puts it in a particular position. We don't, you know, the islands of Great Britain don't have a land border that needs to be looked at with the European Union, right? We have a sea border. But as I say, the overall thrust of Brexit was change in our trading patterns. You know, from my point of view, I mean, I know everybody says that we haven't seen the benefits of Brexit. Look, it took us 14 years to get into the EU. The idea that overnight everything was going to suddenly change is crazy. And I have to say, life was made a lot more difficult by the way the House of Commons...
All right. Well, no, that is absolutely true.
Up to around 2019. So I think the benefits will come over time.
Well, yes, maybe they will. But would Labour, would you like to have the position for the rest of the UK that Northern Ireland now has in terms of that dual market access?
No, we're very clear in terms of the customs union and the single market that the position is set, but that doesn't mean that we can't have a better working relationship with our European trading partners than we have. Because in the end, what do we see? We see businesses that were trading within the EU now aren't trading. And that has a direct impact on jobs here in the UK. That isn't what people voted for. And it's a responsibility of government to make sure that whatever international trade agreements are in place serve the British people well. And at the moment, there are questions.
And the other thing that's encouraging about this is that it is an example of Rishi Sunak engaging in a positive way with the EU, which frankly wasn't the case with Boris Johnson. And of course, we still don't know if he's going to want to play politics with this deal either. And that means that we can now start thinking about things that are really crucial, like a proper security deal with the EU to help to keep us safe. In other words, you know, filling some of the gaps that Brexit has left, both in our economic and our national security.
But would you like Keir Starmer to be advocating closer alignment with the EU in the way that Rishi Sunak seems to be doing, this unique position of having access to the EU and the rest of GB?
Look, I understand where Keir Starmer is. I want there to be a Labour government, and I think that will take us even closer to the EU than we would be. But, you know, he's not...
What we've actually got to do now is deregulate and make ourselves more competitive. Otherwise, there's no point to the whole exercise. So the government is about to put up corporation tax. It's the exact opposite of what we should be doing.
Right, well, what do you say to that, Kit Morehouse?
Well, look, I've been public in the past in my desire to have a low-tax enterprise-based economy that relies on the operation of the free market. So I've been proposing that for 30 years as a politician.
So the government's making a mistake going ahead with corporation tax from 19% to 25%.
I think they should think very seriously about the economic impact. Yes,
you do, and that would be in the budget.
Well, we'll have to wait and see what Jeremy Hunt decides to put in the budget. But
can I just pick up that?
I've said previously elsewhere, we're not going to tax our way to prosperity.
Well, Jackie mentions the tone. Do you think Rishi Sunak has achieved something that previous Conservative Prime Ministers have failed to do over Brexit because of the way he carried it out?
I think it's been a combination of things, to be honest with you. I think definitely, the change in personality and approach may have made a difference. I think the fact that we've got new leaders in some European countries also will have made a difference. I think the fact also that, unfortunately, the horrendous war in Ukraine has bound all of us together in a way perhaps we weren't before, and also that many other countries like Germany have got bigger fish to fry. I mean, the German economy is in really dire straits at the moment, and I suspect they've got an eye to that as well. So there was an element of everybody tiring and wanting to move on, and maybe the timing was propitious.
Let's be honest, the real change has been tone and integrity. Boris Johnson said there was an oven-ready deal that didn't exist. He set us to war with our biggest trading partners with the use of language that wasn't helpful in a negotiation, and any form of diplomacy was completely put to one side. What we're seeing here is, when constructed well, when there's good faith in a negotiation, when we work to a common interest, that we can achieve far more than if we go to a diplomatic, I wouldn't say war's not the right word, but we can't have this division where it's, if one wins, one's got to lose. In the end, in terms of trade, in terms of our common endeavour, we do need to work closer together.
Well, look, I'm all for constructive engagement, absolutely. But the thing I think we've learned over the last few years with the European Union is things are impossible until they're not.
Did Boris Johnson actually fail in his endeavour ultimately?
What Boris Johnson was trying not to do was cripple his own negotiating hand. You don't go into a negotiation saying I'm never going to pull the plug on something. Otherwise, how are you ever going to achieve what you want to achieve? And I'm sorry, but listening to you, it's motherhood and apple pie what you're talking about. Let's be nice to the EU.
It's honesty I was talking about. It's honesty and integrity. Boris Johnson said there would not be checks on goods going to Northern Ireland, and it was not true. It was not true in his agreement.
It's being able to sell our goods. It's having businesses that can succeed, and it's having a secure country. That's not motherhood and apple pie. That's realpolitik. You've got fair dues to you, Isabel. You've been very clear about what you want from Brexit. You want our workforces to be less well protected. You want a low tax.
Never said I want our workforce. Sorry, where did you get that from? What are you talking about?
What are you talking about when you say let's make the most of deregulation? What it usually means is let's remove some of the rights that our.
Never said that we should remove rights.
So what sort of deregulation are you in favour of then?
I don't think that we should sit here and have a detailed conversation about individual bits of deregulation. We have got to find ways to make ourselves more competitive.
But people might want to know.
To outline what these benefits are. Which regulations is it you want to remove that we haven't been able to do?
Well, the Clinical Trials Directive set medical research back 2 decades. We could have a much more coherent and science-based approach to clinical trials than they do in the EU, as an example.
Any other examples?
You can't have it. If you want a small one, in the EU, you can't have a throttle on an electric bike. Now we can in the UK. I mean, there's all sorts of little ones and big ones that we can and should be dealing with.
And would that
make us more competitive?
Isabel, anything that you would like to see?
I'm actually much more focused on the tax situation. I mean, look what happened with AstraZeneca recently. They are setting up a new base, which is not going to be where it should be here in the UK, because we're simply not competitive.
But there was nothing about that corporation tax discussion that you would have had that we couldn't have done whilst we were still a member of the EU.
Well, there's VAT limitations, aren't there?
Let's move on to something that Rishi Sunak will be hoping to capitalise on further following his Windsor framework. This headline in The Times is by Kit Malthouse. Let's swap channel migrants with genuine refugees from France. Just to be clear, this is Kit Malthouse's suggestion. It's tackling small boats that Rishi Sunak wants to try and deal with. It's one of his pledges. He's going to meet the French President Emmanuel Macron next week to talk about this. What is your idea exactly?
Right, so it does take a bit of thinking through, but bear with me, right? So essentially what I thought was, well, the government's bringing some legislation to help deal with this problem, and they've thrown lots of things at the issue. And all of that is welcome, but hasn't really made much difference. The numbers have mounted. And the reason the number have mounted is that we're dealing with business people here. They're making a decision about price versus risk. It makes their life a bit more difficult. They lower their price to maintain demand. So the only way we're going to stop the cross-channel traffic and the dangerous traffic and the deaths on the beaches is to say, right, let's prevent people's ability to cross altogether. The only way we'll do that is by having immediate returns to France, quietly. We are, in theory, able to do that because the advent of military primacy in the Channel means that between the two, the operational relationship is so good, we're intercepting between us now about 95% of people crossing.
95%?
95% of people, whether on the beach in France, in the water, or on the beach, are being intercepted. So we're now able to say, right, we'll return 100% immediately. How do you persuade the French to do that? You say, well, OK, in exchange, we will take a refugee from within France who wants to resettle in the UK in a controlled and orderly fashion. Now, the key thing to remember is that by doing that, no one would think it's worth crossing. And if no one crosses, we wouldn't have to make any exchanges. So the paradox is, by promising to do this exchange, we wouldn't have to do it in the first place because the traffic would evaporate. And in the short term, given that the good weather is coming, numbers are likely to mount, and Rishi Sunak's got a summit with Macron on the 10th of March to talk about these issues. It struck me as maybe a kind of elegant solution to what is a problem.
Imaginative.
I'm former Home Secretary, and I'll come to all of you. What do you think?
Well, fair dues to Kit for trying to think about a practical solution to this as opposed to a dog whistle Rwanda solution that has achieved nothing so far. But of course, the fundamental pull factor to people across the Channel is the fact that you can arrive here. I mean, let's not forget that most of the people that come across the Channel do then have their applications for asylum approved. So they've got a legitimate case. But it takes so long that those for whom there is not a case, there is no ability to return them quickly. So I agree with Kit that actually returning people quickly is the most important thing. The fundamental change that needs to happen is the Home Office has got to get a grip of the length of time it takes to decide whether or not somebody has got a viable right to stay in the UK or not. And that's the real challenge. And that would prevent, I think, quite a lot of the people, the terrible trafficking that's happening across the Channel, as would more engagement of our law enforcement.
Isabel, do you want to ask Kit or interrogate him on his idea?
Well, no, initially I thought this idea sounds absurd and it's quite hard to get your head
Why?
around.
Which bit did you think was absurd?
Because you're essentially doing you're not actually net better off in the initial stages of your idea
in terms of numbers.
Because we're taking an established refugee, somebody whose claim is legitimate, in exchange for them keeping one who would have come over here. So we're still getting the extra numbers. But I accept your point that quite soon it would be apparent that there would be no point making the journey. I slightly fear it's not going to happen. I'm kind of struggling to imagine the French authorities kind of getting on board with this. But we do need imaginative ideas. You're completely right that none of what's been proposed so far is happening. And I think it is encouraging that these statistics that you found, 95% is intercepted. Then, that really does raise the question, why are we not better at doing the next
Well, that's
bit?
why Manston was so full, because we're intercepting almost all of them as they come across. And the armed forces have done a fantastic job forging a great relationship with the French to make that happen. The key thing, though, is, and you're quite right, Isabel, that in the early stages, neither side, French or British, are worse off. We're all about the same on numbers. But as the incentive to cross goes, two things would happen. First of all, nobody would cross, so there'd be no exchanges. All those people gathering on the French coast wouldn't bother. They either wouldn't come or they'd disperse and go elsewhere. And those that wanted to make a claim for asylum could make it in France if they were going to make it at all.
Right. Well,
so nobody is in a worse situation.
But the key question,
But the key thing is, sorry, Joe,
is the French authorities. Have you actually spoken to the French authorities?
No.
Has anyone?
No.
Right. Okay.
No, I'm not a minister. I have no contact with the French authorities. It's not my job to go out and do that.
No, but even sounding it out.
But the key thing is to remember, you've got to separate two issues here. There's a whole conversation to be had about refugees and how refugees access the UK. Now, at the moment, as you know, we have a number of bespoke routes, whether it's Afghanistan or Syria or Ukraine. Or
the Afghanistan routes are pretty well closed.
We have a number of bespoke routes, and there's an argument to be had. But there's a separate argument, and I think the problem is we conflate the two to be about how we stop this incredibly dangerous and evil trade across the Channel.
All right,
and that was what I'm primarily focused on.
OK.
But I think that's a real issue, isn't it? Because in the end, this is a distraction and an admission of failure. Since Rishi Sunak stood up in November and said that he would end the small boat crossing, the backlog on asylum cases, decisions, has increased by 50%. That's happened because the asylum system is completely backlogged and it hasn't got the capacity. And in the end, you have got to resource the Home Office to turn around those applications to make sure that those who have a right to be here can be here so that they can live a settled, stable life. And those people who don't have a right to be here don't stay
Jim's right
here.
about the backlog, and I think the Prime Minister said he's putting 400 more people into the
now.
But all this other issue is
But the key thing to remember is that the numbers have gone up because we had a big bump of people coming over the summer, and it's worth taking a step back and saying...
hang on a second, can I just tell you there, because I've got this graph here from the government saying migrants crossing the Channel in small boats alone for 2022 was over 45,500. So separate to the schemes that you're talking about more recently for Ukraine and Hong Kong.
The numbers.
But just so those are the numbers that have gone up.
And that's the problem I'm trying to solve.
And only now the government is saying it's going to put more resources in terms of actually processing applications. So it has been a failure, hasn't it?
Well, it depends, right? You can look at two sides of the coin.
Yes, it has.
So first of all, you can say that this is a failure, but you have to step back and say why in the last 2 or 3 years the numbers ramped. Well, the reason they ramped was because we were so successful at closing down the route through the tunnel and across the Channel, right? So all those stories of people gathering at Sangatte and all that doesn't happen now.
But Jim, what would you
found another way?
Jim, what would Labour do in terms of deterrent? I mean, this is an idea. Yes, you're right. You're not a minister anymore. You haven't spoken to the French authorities. It would be intriguing to know what they think of it. But what would your concrete proposal be?
In the end, you have to clamp down on the criminal gangs that are exploiting vulnerable people and who are abusing our asylum system.
But they're doing that now. That's the pursuit.
And so the question is then...
The gangs just get replaced every time you arrest them.
So the question is, how many criminal gangs have been arrested and locked up for abusing people and trafficking people across the Channel?
Why are we accepting anyone from Albania at all? I mean, why should the Home Office fanny around spending months or even years looking at cases from Albania? I mean, I genuinely would be really interested in Jackie's perspective as to why the Home Office, from your experience in it, is so incompetent in this area. Is it a numbers? Is it a lack of resources?
I have to say it was considerably less incompetent in my time than
I think you're actually right,
than it is now. And to be honest, the other thing that I hope we didn't do was waste time and money on initiatives like the Rwanda initiative, which is all about getting on the front of the newspaper and nothing about actually solving the problem.
Has that been a waste of time, the Rwanda initiative?
And money. It's cost a lot of money.
I don't think so. I mean, I think, look, as I think I said in my article, even if Rwanda gets off the ground, the Rwanda government said they're only going to take a few hundred in the 5-year trial. So it's not enough to provide a deterrent to the 46,000 people that are coming, right? All the people traffickers will do is lower their price. So instead of it being $10,000, make it $8,000 because the risk is a bit higher. And on the pursue element, I mean, Jackie will know this from the Home Office. It's a bit like fighting drugs, right? If you go for the people and you take them out, great. The NCA, the cops, they're very good at doing that. And there have been arrests in Turkey and elsewhere of people who are people trafficking. They basically just get replaced. Well, they get replaced quite quickly. You've got to close down their ability to do business, which is what I'm trying to propose.
Do you think the idea put forward by Kit Malthouse is worth investigating or not?
Well, I mean, I'll leave it for him to investigate his own idea. I think there is a danger this exposes the risks in blue sky thinking a bit more. But like everything, I mean, it's a bit like the Rwanda issue.
What's wrong with politics?
The test of that policy was never how many people would Rwanda take. It was about the distraction of that politic. And that's exactly what this proposal is about. It's not about a fundamental reform of the system. It's about getting the public to look over there because it ignores a real crisis in the system.
No, that's really unfair.
I think to malign people's motives is complete. It's part of the civility in politics. And there are other countries. So when the Danes do it, will you say the same thing? The Danes are looking at it as well. We're all struggling with the problem, and the problem is that we every single day, particularly during the summer, there are hundreds of people taking their lives in their hands in the Channel.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to wake up to dead bodies on the beach at Deal. And that is the problem that we're trying to solve. Now, if that means people are having to look at issues like Rwanda and other major solutions, then I think they should be allowed to find that space to do that. Because their primary aim is to stop people dying.
But you're right that it's about a pull, and that's what gives the criminals the freedom and the incentive to do what they're doing. The best way of stopping the pull is to make decisions quickly when people make their claim for asylum. That's the fundamental way in which you're going.
Hang on, we're going to move on because we're going to run out of time. I want to show you. Let's see if you can find a solution to this. The Guardian: Lidl becomes latest retailer to ration sales of salad ingredients. You will know supermarkets have been imposing buying limits on things like peppers and tomatoes. Jim, Shadow Environment Secretary, you've had a meeting this morning. What's causing these salad shortages?
Well, first of all, the lack of a single government plan to ensure our nation's food security is part of that. The government work in silos, although they haven't got a cross-government plan on food. But also, they've been missing in action when it comes to support for farmers, when it comes to security in the supply chain. And in a way, they've allowed our kind of fairly healthy and generally well-run supermarket chains to kind of manage our food security in a way that they've been very hands-off. And the risk of that means that when the supply chain is under pressure, which it is at the moment, the government haven't got an answer to that. Well, actually, the answer was go and buy turnips.
Go to turnips by the where they had everything.
Turnips, by the way, which are out of season.
In my Waitrose.
And so, in the end, if you haven't got a government that's willing to step up on this and have a proper policy that includes farmers, manufacturers, and retailers, we're not going to make a breakthrough on this.
All right. Well, there's one solution here from Mick Hucknall, who you may remember, my days, simply read, tweeting, "For the sake of balanced fairness, can some of our mainland European friends please post photos of their supermarket food shortages? Thanks in advance. Hashtag Brexit benefits."
Oh,
yeah, hang on. Well,
all of a sudden Brexit would kick in 4 years later.
Well, it's kicked in all the way through this programme. This is it. Normandy this morning. There you can see an abundance of fruit and salad. And then, are you going to continue interrupting me as well as each other? I will give you the chance. And then this in Brussels this evening, talking of the EU. There we have an abundance of tomatoes. Hang on, we've been told that it's about poor weather. Oh, and there's another one. Salisbury here in Italy. We're told that it's bad weather in southern Spain and parts of North Africa, and yet the supermarkets here, this is only a selection, are full in parts of Europe, but not here. Is Brexit the reason?
So the first thing to say is that small children across the land are cheering.
What? Because they can't get tomatoes. All right. And the serious answer.
So look, as far as I could see, the first thing to say just on Jim's thing is that one of the most dreaded phrases in business is "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." The idea that the government should be somehow organising the transport of tomatoes from Morocco seems to be a bit nuts when we've got perfectly good and very sophisticated private sector organisations that can do it. As I understand it, it's down to weather. Seems to be a bit of a problem.
I'm sorry, that doesn't
power costs on domestic, and then also price, that our supermarkets aren't willing to pay the price in the same way the Germans and French are.
Oh, well, do you buy that? Coin of phrase, or is Brexit a problem?
We have miles of greenhouses here in the UK that are empty because the government excluded farmers from the energy-intensive support package, and so they can't be heated. That's why they're empty. That's why we have shortages, because we haven't got the resilience here in the UK.
Is Brexit a reason in this?
Well, isn't it perfectly possible to say there are a whole range of reasons, of which one is Brexit?
Please, come.
It's definitely an impact in terms of Labour. It's definitely had an impact on Labour.
Don't you think that, for example...
Brexit does not control the weather. I'd love to think that we could make it sunny days every day.
Kit, you're desperate to defend Brexit to
the point
where you won't even accept that it may be an element in what we're facing. You know, there's a problem in this debate that it's either all Brexit or not Brexit at all. No, it's perfectly possible to say there are elements of this shortage that are exacerbated by Brexit. There are elements of this shortage that are exacerbated by the fact that the government could have seen it coming and did nothing about it and preferred to talk about turnips. There are elements of this that are about weather.
The tomato crop in
not being honest about the range of factors.
I mean, is that the problem, that it's too polarised? I mean, could Brexit be a factor? People will look at pictures like this and say, why are there tomatoes and peppers in supermarkets across France, across Italy and across Spain, and yet not here? Yes, energy prices could be part of...
I'm perfectly prepared, actually, to agree with Jackie's position that there may be a range of factors here, but I would like to know specifically what it is about Brexit that caused the problem with the tomato supply.
I think things that have contributed to increases in energy costs.
We're not to do with Brexit, they're more to do with Ukraine.
Sure. they're partly to do... Well, this is another area where you've got elements that are to do with Ukraine and elements that are to do with Brexit, as are labour shortages. This is
There aren't labour shortages. We've got a lot of extra people, actually.
Well, hang on.
There are. I think in agriculture there are labour shortages.
Right, I mean...
The government's interpretation of Brexit and the cap they put on seasonal workers, that's the issue.
I mean, is that one of the problems, the seasonal workers issue? We were talking about it, actually, just as we were coming on air.
We need to get our own people working. There's a million more people on out-of-work benefits.
There is a genuine issue with seasonal workers, and we have a seasonal worker scheme now that will, has been negotiated with the NFU and farmers to get people in to do that kind of fruit and vegetable picking as required, right? So I'm not pretending there aren't issues to do with the kind of workforce, but then there have been in the past over the years, and in fact we've had problems in the past even when we were in the EU. I mean, the EU is no guarantee of supply, and indeed quite a lot of our tomatoes now come from Morocco, which has nothing to do with the EU whatsoever, right? So
the issue is not about where those goods come from. We've always benefited from a worldwide supply of our food. What we haven't got at the moment, because of the government, because of the government, is that we haven't got domestic resilience in place. There's been 7,000 food businesses that have gone out of business since 2019 on this government's watch. That reduces our resilience, and all the issues about labour, about the lack of resilience on gas and energy costs for our greenhouses, all that finds its way straight to the door of the government, who do not take responsibility.
Kit?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Therese seems to be taking responsibility for it. I mean, she's asking questions.
One example.
Sitting down with the food industry on a regular basis to talk about supply.
What's the one thing that she has done that's going to make a difference on the ground? The one thing. Just one.
In the end, as I say,
just one example.
I'll tell you exactly what the government is doing since Brexit. They are completely reforming the Common Agricultural Policy so that it doesn't disadvantage our own British farmers in the way that it did.
You can only make that comment if you haven't spoken to a farmer. Because farmers are
masses
absolutely
of farmers.
up in
I've
raw.
written a whole book about this, actually, so I do know what I'm talking about.
Well, I speak to farmers every week, and every single one...
Absolutely,
every week, of course I do. I was in Lancashire the other week. I'm in Southport on Thursday. I met with the NFU today, and the reason why farmers are disadvantaged is because the government are deliberately changing direct payments. And because of that, a third of farmers are not financially viable without that direct support. That's happening because of the actions of the government.
So you oppose the environmental
handouts?
You can do both, but it's a balance. They're going through a cost of living crisis and an input crisis. And there's an underspend of nearly £1 billion, we're told, in the ELM scheme that could be used for a fair transition for farmers to help them get over the hump of the cost of living crisis and the input crisis, and the government are choosing not to.
And part of the problem as well, part of the problem on the food as well is
hang on, let Kit Moorhouse respond.
There is a bit of panic buying going on, which is causing a bit of shortage, a bit like the bog roll riots during the pandemic.
Are you blaming consumers
hopefully the whole thing will settle itself down quite soon.
You're blaming consumers now, Kit.
But somehow I don't think we're all going to get
You're blaming consumers for not eating enough turnips.
Well, I think this is the point. This is the point at which... Hang on. This is the point at which it might be appropriate to come to civility in public life, because this is a foundation. It's the Joe Cox Foundation. We can see a picture of Joe Cox tragically murdered, and David Amis 7 years later. He was also murdered, Conservative MP, former Labour MP. What is the point of this commission for civility in public life? Because we all want civility in public life.
Exactly. And when Joe was murdered in 2016, I think a lot of people felt that might bring people to a position where they understood the damage that abuse and intimidation were doing. What we've actually seen since then is, if anything, a worsening of that. Last year, 70% of councillors said they'd experienced abuse and intimidation. Between 2017 and 2019, the amount of abuse for candidates standing in elections actually increased. So there is a problem here. We talk a lot about the problem. What the Commission is about is actually, as Joe would have done, saying, this is difficult, but it's not insoluble. So what are people's experiences and what are people's suggestions about how we could improve it? And what we're going to be doing between now and the summer is taking evidence, listening to people who experience it and have good ideas, and coming forward with recommendations, which we will then advocate for and campaign to get put into place.
Is there, though, a significant difference between what happened to Joe Cox and David Amis? I mean, they were murdered by extremists. That, of course, is totally different to what you're talking about also, the daily abuse that MPs face. I mean, do you think they need to be treated quite separately in that sense? Or when you say not enough has been done, are you talking about increased security for MPs who come face to face with the public?
Yes, of course there is a difference. And when you have essentially terrorist attacks like this, that's a job for the police and for the security agencies. But there is an environment created for extremism that starts with the abuse and intimidation that every single person around this table will understand happens to democratically elected politicians. And the reason why it matters is because it is also putting people off coming into politics. You know, we've had a lively debate today. That's what I want to see. This isn't about somehow or another suggesting that we all need to be nice and soft with each other the whole time. Actually, if people are put off coming into politics, you're restricting political debate. You're making it more difficult for people to have their say, to argue through the issues and the politics that is at the heart of our democracy. So it's an attack on our democracy, and if Jo was here, she would have done something about it, and that's what we're trying to do in the Commission.
What would you do about it, if anything, in terms of tackling it?
Well, I think the aims of it are laudable. I mean, whether it will make any difference or not, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, you know, during my 20-odd years in politics, I have to say that I've lived through the advent of social media and the fact that lots and lots of people are seduced into popularity on social media by saying awful, dreadful, you know, aggressive things about other people seems to be what drives a huge amount, certainly the abuse that I get online. I have to say, I think it also starts with members of Parliament. I think the way members of Parliament treat each other sets a tone and sets an approach. I mean, I hope I've always operated on the basis that my view is Jim is misguided. He's not evil, right? I think he's just wrong.
Well, that's reassuring.
But there's quite a lot of people who regard me, because I'm a Conservative, as intrinsically evil and wicked, and they, you know, will provide the abuse. Same is true. I mean, the person who gets the most abuse of all of us is Diane Abbott, astonishingly, who I've known for a long time in London politics, and I find that that's where it starts. So I hope at that end of kind of civil discourse we can get to a position where nobody involved in politics calls anybody else involved in politics intrinsically evil or wicked or scum or whatever it might be. At the other end, you know, when you meet MPs and other parliamentarians from overseas, they are astonished at how unguarded MPs are, how unsecured MPs are here. Well, you know, I met some members of Parliament from Turkey. They all get cars and drivers and security people.
But in a sense, that's the beauty of our democracy.
I agree.
And it was always so disappointing. You know, the years I spent in the lobby as a political journalist based at Westminster, every time there was some kind of infringement of security at Parliament, more barriers went up. You then had more screens and less access for ordinary people to their politicians.
Well, and that is the key. I mean, would you like to see more security? I mean, do you worry when you have your surgeries or when you're going to events? So you are unguarded in that sense, aren't you?
Well, I mean, security definitely has increased and it's improved. So MPs can call in support for advice surgeries. Not for events, but certainly for static advice surgeries. We all have an assessment of our private homes. We all have a personal assessment of our movements and the way that we move around. But in the end, I think we do have a problem. And the problem is that for too many people, they separate out for reasons only known to themselves. I'm talking about authorities, you know, whether it's police forces around the country. There is no uniform approach to this. Different police forces take it very differently. Where the online world is treated very differently to the real world, almost like the two should never come together. And I just say this, a person who is making threats online is a real person. They are sat at home and they are making the threats and they are being incited somehow. I've been through the experience of somebody going through court, somebody being convicted of making death threats, and the impact that has, not just on me, but it was significant, but also on staff and on your family, you know, because you have to take these threats seriously. And so we do need to go further. We do need to see an improvement with the response from authorities, the response from online media companies. But we need to be careful that we don't take away that bit that is special, which is that MPs in Britain are as poachable.
And people would set an example, I have to say. I mean, I have to say, Jackie, in 11 years of live TV, Nobody has ever turned to me and spat, "Shut up." Now, you could get a lot worse than that, and I get much worse online. But it isn't setting a high standard, is it?
I apologise for telling you to shut up. I don't think I spat.
I've never told anyone to shut up on live TV.
So you are a good example then, Isabel, and
well,
I apologise.
Probably not always, but I'm trying to be.
I apologise for telling you to
shut up. But look, it's fine for there to be robust debate, as you say.
Yeah.
And all of us get an absolute kicking online. It goes with the territory, but it's where it crosses the line, it can become quite frightening. And I think everybody around this table has experienced that.
And when are you going to report? When's this commission?
So we're going to be gathering the recommendations up to the summer. Then we're going to be gathering the suggestions. Then we'll be putting together a set of recommendations that we'll be reporting in the autumn. Then we'll be campaigning to get them delivered and changed.
That's all we have time for today. I'll be back with Prime Minister's questions tomorrow at 11:15. From all of us here, bye-bye.